So thanks everybody for being here. We are recording this so that we can share it with our colleagues who aren't able to make it, and so I appreciate you guys being here. But today is the culmination of a 2-day charrette that we were doing in order to capture the feedback that we've received so far on our reinvestment plan. What we've been doing is looking at the 20-year vision of what Olde Town is going to be, and what's really important to us is that we collect as much community feedback and community engagement at the beginning part of it so that as we move forward and talk about some of these ideas and concepts, that we know that we have the community buy-in. So I'm here to introduce Ryan S., because I don't know how to say your last name, but you don't know how to say my last name, so we're even. Ryan S. With Dig Studios, and they're going to cover kind of the community engagement piece, the guiding principles, and we want to see if those resonate with you, and then some of the ideas and concepts that we're starting with as we move forward in the process. So turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Sorry. Housekeeping. If you do ask a question, you have to ask a question into the microphone because we're recording it in order for your dialogue to be picked up on microphone. So I'm going to sit out here with a microphone. If you raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks, and it's Ryan Sotirakis. There will be a quiz later. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to walk through kind of an overview of where we are right now in the project, where we've been, how we started, and then end up with an overview of the last 2 days of the charrette. So first we wanted to talk briefly about the community engagement we've done. We've spent most of the summer working on this through a variety of channels. And the first is we had an online survey through Speak Up Arvada, open for 2 months. So it opened in mid-June, closed in mid-August. We had 3,200 plus interactions with the site and over 1,800 responses, which is pretty phenomenal. So this is an overview of the questions that we asked in that. It was pretty broad, high level, 8 to 9 questions. Kind of how often do you visit Olde Town? What do you go there for? How do you get there? Where do you park? Why don't you park in the hub parking garage? Specifically asked. What sort of changes, if you had $1 million, what would you ask the city or others to do with it in Olde Town? So Speak Up was great. It put out these lovely charts and graphs and saved us hours of work to make them and summarized the results really well. There were also, I will add though, there's a lot of open-ended comments and some of the questions had an other category, so we did go through all of those as well. We categorized them by themes, keywords, etc. So you'll see how those themes on this next slide kind of translate into the guiding principles and the work we've been doing. So overall, this is a summary of the biggest things we heard through the online survey. So when do you most often visit Olde Town? Pretty much weekly to monthly, so pretty frequent visitation. Why? Dining was high and away the highest, followed by festivals and events and shopping. And also the G-line access did come up pretty high on the list. Although when asked how do you get to Olde Town, transit was pretty low, but about 20% of people said they walk or bike, which is pretty great. The rest of them mostly are arriving by car. Rail and bus and other modes were pretty single digits. If you do drive, where do you park? Most everyone, the highest answer was they park on the street. If they don't park in the hub, the most consistent reasons were it's too far, perception of being too far. It's confusing, both getting in and out of it, payment or no payment. Lots of things about it are confusing. And a lot of it was also that it's just not a habit for people. They typically are used to parking on the street. They maybe don't have a lot of trouble finding a spot. They just aren't in the habit of thinking about it. There were also quite a few that didn't know about it. So we were sort of surprised by that response. But there were quite a few people, both in person and online, that said we didn't know about it. So what the meat of this? What would you do with $1 million? What would you like to see improved? far and away, design and build permanent street closures. We'll talk a little bit about that name in a little bit. And also expand it. So it's overwhelmingly popular. People want to see it made permanent and even expanded to additional blocks. Overhead string lighting was ranked very highly in terms of ways to spend money. Improving Old Town Square as well. Activating the other streets such as YUKON and Webster and further down Grandview, either direction. And more shade was also pretty highly ranked. Like I said, we also went to 3 community events. We had a open house for bid members. We went to Arvada on Tap. We got to sample some lovely beer there. The conversations got pretty interesting towards the end of the festival. Not from us, from festival goers. And we were also at Second Saturday this past month, which was, I will say, a huge success. I mean, it was nonstop the whole night. People did not just walk by our booth, and we didn't have a banner or anything. There were just 3 of us with boards on easels, and almost everyone who walked by stopped. They wanted to know what was going on. So we probably had about 300 plus individual conversations through those 3 events. Same as the online survey. Overwhelming support for the pedestrian streets, make it permanent, and parking came up a lot, mostly that the hub is confusing or unfamiliar or unknown or not known that it's free, et cetera. So pretty consistent answers all the way around all summer. And I just got to add that in about a 15-year career, I don't know that I've ever worked on a planning project that's had as much overwhelming clarity in terms of what the community wants to see. So, so that's our engagement snapshot for the summer. We've also been spending the last few months doing a lot of background research and existing conditions analysis and studying the area and the context. Part of this was one of the members of our team, Erica Heller, did extensive research on 3 kind of key trends, best practices in downtown planning today. We have, like I said, very well researched white papers. If you're interested in really diving deep into these, we can get those out to you. They will also be in the final plan appendix. But I'm just going to summarize the implications basically of each of these 4, how it can be applied to Old Town. So equitable placemaking was the first one. This applies to both physical design and programming. In terms of Old Town Arvada, engage low access groups during the design. Make sure to pay attention to safety in the design. Make sure to enhance multicultural programming and open programming to all groups that may want to use the spaces, Old Town Square and the streets. Flexibility is really key, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And ample public facilities, both universal access in terms of wheelchair users, bicycles, strollers, et cetera, but also restrooms, Wi-Fi, things of that nature are really important, water fountains. Second one was success factors for pedestrian-only streets. So in terms of Old Town, anticipate a redesign in 2 to 3 decades. Typically, pedestrian malls, if you will, need to be redesigned and rethought every 20 to 30 years. Many of them in the past have failed. They were very popular in the 1960s, and then a lot of them were just redesigned back to open to traffic. Some in college towns, beach communities, mountain communities have been successful. That doesn't mean it can't work here, but some factors to think about. Expanded residential base nearby to have that sort of daily use. Increasing entertainment programming. Make sure to budget for that ahead of time so that there's kind of always something going on. And a really, again, flexible and adaptable design that's not too prescriptive to prohibit rethinking it. And in a lot of ways, a more sort of a blank slate, if you will, a clean, simple design that can be programmed for lots of different things may not need to be completely rethought as frequently. The last one was alleys, because this has come up a lot in conversation, and so we wanted to look into it, explore the trends there. You know, pedestrianized or enhanced alleys are very popular. Lots of communities in Colorado have implemented them in some variety, some way. There were case studies of Longmont, Colorado Springs, and Glenwood Springs in this report. You know, universally well received, improves the perception. There's a lot of things to consider with waste management and trying to consolidate that so you don't have dozens of dumpsters in them. But you also have to consider deliveries. Businesses need the alleys for their deliveries oftentimes, particularly in the case of Arvada, because if the street is closed to vehicles, then you have to use the alley. Partnering with the businesses in terms of programming, outdoor seating, et cetera, is very important in all of the case studies. So you can see some of the implications here. Decide the goals and trade-offs if this was something to pursue down the road. Try a sort of proof of concept in one block potentially, particularly a block that has a lot of willing businesses. However, we, the project team, did mention this to the technical committee last week, and we've talked a lot about it. You're in a great position because Arvada's got tons of public space to work with, right? You have the current street closures, the community saying they would like more of that. You have the RTD Plaza, Old Town Square, McAvoy Park that's sort of right there, but there's some perception barriers to, so there's some caution around trying to over-program too many spaces, right? But that doesn't mean improving alleys in terms of cleanliness, lighting, safety isn't certainly worthwhile. So we've also, we have Wilson and Company engineers on our team looking at transportation, data, a real quick high-level synopsis. Again, there's lots of data that will be in the plan, or if you're really interested, we can send you, but crash frequency has been about the same. The locations have changed, obviously, since the street was closed to vehicles. But there's a lot more detailed analysis needed in terms of intersection, how the intersections are operating. The hub parking is underutilized. The graph at the bottom is the ebbs and flows of utilization of the parking garage. So you can see kind of that's throughout a week. So evening use, midday and evening use is highest. It's pretty high on Friday nights, but really never breaks that 50% mark. The average, generalized average, is about 20% utilization. Scooter use is also pretty popular on the weekends as well. I will blow through these really quickly, but just to give you an idea of all the work that's been done to date, we've done a pretty broad look at Old Town from both existing conditions, what's there, where are opportunities for enhancements or improvements, where are there constraints. This is sort of a zoomed out look. There's 2 adjacent planning plans in the works right now, Ralston Road land use update about to start, as well as the Newtown sub-area plan, identifying potential gateways, connections to Ralston Creek Trail right there, but perceptually maybe further than it is. We've looked at public realm opportunities. Where's the street closure currently? Where could it maybe be expanded? Again, with intersection gateways to kind of create this sense of arrival. We'll go into more detail on actual sort of strategies around this. But yeah, there's a really great network of public space here, Mobility, where are there bike lanes existing or planned? Where are there barriers, particularly? There's little zigzags. Each block of the street closure is a little bit of a barrier for emergency access, bicycles, things of that nature, strollers. You got to kind of go up onto the sidewalk, really, and use the corner ramps. Ralston Road also, obviously, a big barrier. And then land use opportunities for adaptive reuse or sites to, consider, adjust incentives for reinvestment in the future. So that brings us to the Charrette. So the last 2 days, yesterday and today, we were here at City Hall all day. Yesterday was kind of a drop-in work session with bid members, our technical committee, Urban Renewal, Historical Society, Visitor Center, and the Chamber. We're all invited to come in, talk to us, see what was going on. We went through all the engagement data and information we had, put together a draft list of guiding principles, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. Put together some early thoughts around planning strategies and recommendations, some early alternative sketches for different some of these different elements, and just generally sketched concepts and ideas and sort of threw things at the wall and waited to see what stuck. So we're not going to get really deep into the actual design ideas as they're all still evolving today, but I want to walk you through kind of the process and where it's headed. So this is an important one though. This is the draft. These are working principles, but 4 strong guiding principles for Old Town. And you'll see certain words underlined, and the reason for that is those words came up repeatedly in both the survey and conversations in person with folks throughout our engagement process. So I'll go through these real quickly, and then would love to stop and kind of see what you all think and how this resonates with you. But Old Town should be vibrant, safe and active place to have fun, to socialize, and to enjoy unique experiences. Old Town will be connected, so walkable, easy to navigate, accessible to all users, and safely linked to surrounding neighborhoods and amenities. That Old Town is resilient, prioritizing economic and ecological sustainability, but also remaining flexible and adaptable for the future. So there's the flexibility piece, right? We think that makes sense as resilient idea because it means, cost savings in the future, easily programmable. And lastly, distinct, a unique and historic downtown that people remember and return to. So it's also a good pause in me just talking. So I'd love to know if, how this all sits with you. These are working, right? So these are not finalized. These will also be presented to the public at the open house on September 21st to get the community's feedback as well before they're in any way finalized.
Would anybody like to make any comments? I'll bring you the mic.
Shocking. I have a thought. I'm just wondering, you mentioned some things about trends of what's successful and what's not. I'm wondering about the trends with alley activation. So do we see any data or historical data about activating an alley, and if it's a trend where it's cool to go to a speakeasy now versus in 30 years, people are like, why are you in this alley?
That's a good question. I don't know that has been studied. I don't know that there are numbers that would reflect whether or not it is a trend. For sure, I would have to consult the long paper that Erica put together in more detail to look for that specifically. But I can certainly look into it. I haven't seen any personally in my work in terms of whether it's continuing to increase because you see it spreading around the country, or if it's decreasing, or I don't know. I don't know if my teammates know anything about that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheney with the design team. And I was just going to mention one of the case studies is Longmont. And what they found is they did a lot of investment and they spent a lot of money on the alleys. And it's not used nearly as much as they thought. The breezeways that go from their main street to the alley are really active, the perpendicular ones, but the ones that run parallel to their main street do not function as they intended.
And their breezeways connect to parking areas, correct? And those tend to be pretty successful. Same in Fort Collins, right? They connect to sort of the main street to the parking areas are usually used pretty frequently.
Any other comments on the guiding principles? Do they resonate? Do they feel that they are consistent with our view of Old Town, or are there anything that is missing? I see general head nodding up and down for my audience at home.
You don't have to decide today.
Yeah, and you'll have another bite at the apple.
All right, so we'll keep going, and I'll go into a little more detail about each of these. So what do we mean about when we say vibrant? These visuals are also kind of working diagrammatic ideas of what each principle might look like with these sort of tactical strategies here. So by vibrant, flexible and active public spaces, activating the edges. So the hot pink are sort of the edges or the streetscapes that are fairly inactive right now. That there's potential to activate, whether through streetscape improvements, infill development or redevelopment, or that could eventually have storefronts or residences, things that, the school is sort of a big, there's just general sort of beautification, art, things like that. Expand the energy, so you sort of see some light yellow bubbles or sort of these energy centers, but they're pretty concentrated, right, in the generally the L or the T, and there will be a lot of energy down to the south. And then leveraging food and beverage, so dining was the number one reason people visit Old Town. And so we wanted to throw onto the map where are all the food and beverage operators, and they're the little blue dots, which I realize might be a little hard to see, but those tend to coincide pretty well with the energy zones, right? You don't see, they're pretty much Old Wadsworth, Grandview, a little on YUKON, and there will be down to the south as well. So leveraging that, look for ways to get people that are there to dine to stay longer, right? To linger and do other things. For connected, expanding this pedestrian experience, that was loud and clear from the engagement. Prioritizing the special streets throughout the district, connecting to adjacent amenities. So you'll see this sort of shows connecting up to Ralston Creek, connecting to the south to sort of these new gateways on 55th and 56th, linking to the bike and trail network I covered, and creating a sense of arrival. This was something we talked a lot about yesterday, which was to be able to communicate very clearly to drivers, cyclists, walkers, everyone, that you have arrived in Old Town and that the scene changes. You want to slow down, you want to linger, you want to explore, and it should be a very noticeable difference from through that transition point. And so we've started to identify what kind of intersections and what points might make sense for primary, some of the larger, bigger roadway gateways, and maybe some secondary ones as well. And the last thing that didn't make it on this list was connected, work on improving access to the hub parking garage. So we're starting to think about some ideas for that as well. Resilient, so flexible and adaptable zone is this yellow, right? It's not only the streets, but it's Old Town Square and the RTD Plaza. So we're kind of starting to envision this zone that's all sort of very well connected and is all very flexible and programmed and active. Ensuring universal accessibility for wheelchair users, bicycles, strollers, everyone, and all members of the public, basically. Expanding the tree canopy, so the hot pink is where there is a lack of tree canopy. Those streets, Old Wadsworth is pretty good for the most part, but 57th certainly, most of YUKON, some of Webster, lacking a lot of tree canopy. Encourage non-driving modes, so try to maybe bump up that walking and biking number as much as possible. Look for opportunities for green infrastructure through design projects as well, and that can mean stormwater management, it can mean just general greening and tree canopy, all sorts of things. And particularly important for resilient is operations and maintenance and making sure that it's cost effective into the future. And the last one, distinct. So activating some of these architectural assets, the tabernacle, the flour mill, I'm blanking on the name of the historic house over by McAvoy Park. Sorry. Sorry? Calendar building, okay. Incentivize some reinvestment in these pink areas where they're sort of underutilized in terms of land use. Leveraging the historic district, which is highlighted on here, it's a really wonderful asset that really draws a lot of people. A lot of people said they like Old Town for the history and the architecture. Create a special place through design and lighting. So the red T is sort of like this maybe enhanced lighting, whether that's overhead or some amount of pedestrian scaled special lighting. And lastly, we were talking about this today. We thought there's a really great opportunity here to maybe name this space. We realized that for public spaces, that would need to go through a council naming convention process. But it's a great opportunity to really give it a strong identity, and including the RTD Plaza as well. I mean, RTD Plaza could probably be something cooler. It could be a cooler name, right? So this is a great chance through this, after this plan and over the next several years to maybe think about like what is, it's meet me at, you'll see we just threw something in here as a placeholder, the promenade. So this is a little bit of the work that we've done over the past couple of days. And what's important here is sort of all the ways we're thinking about this as a team and the process that we're going through, less than the specific designs. That's why it's maybe a little hard to see, and that's okay because we've got several months to workshop this. But in terms of the promenade, the pedestrianized streets doesn't roll off the tongue really easily. So there's a lot of different ways it could be thought about. There's sort of just expanding, up to Ralston Road potentially. There's potentially looking at the idea of reintroducing one-way vehicles on Grandview to improve access to the main parking garage entrance on Vance Street. There's the opportunity to reintroduce vehicles at certain times or in hybrid fashions on several blocks. Open it when it needs to be, close it when needed for events, festivals. So we're not saying one way or the other. There's a lot to think about and sort of get through. And the next slide shows all the impacts that these ideas might have on transportation as well. But you can see the parking garage sort of outlined in red at the bottom, and making sure to include that and access to that in any study that we do. But so we're still workshopping through a lot of these ideas. These will also be at the public meeting, and I'll talk about next steps, but there will be a work session with both City Council and the bid board in October. We're going to really dive into these different design concepts as well. So plenty of time these are not preferred ideas yet at all. But we've been studying it both diagrammatically, in plan, sort of looking at more detail of like, well, if that was the case, what would this look like in terms of tree canopy and outdoor cafe seating and parking, as well as in section or perspective, what might those different options start to look like? What would the experience start to feel like? These type of drawings are really helpful. So in terms of the streets and the promenades, if you will, this is kind of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of days. We've also looked at the square as well, and what makes this a civic heart that is open, flexible, and active, and how can the organization of it be thought about in different ways. The red, pink are sort of the existing buildings, and you can see the square, and sort of testing different options for how the space is laid out and how it functions, how people access it, sort of which parts are open, which parts are more enclosed, et cetera. Where's green, where's hard, where's water, things of that nature. So we'll be continuing on with this. We've also started looking at some of the other streets. I was pretty high on the list of things the community wanted. It was activating some of these other streets as well. YUKON Street already has sort of a little bit of energy happening with a couple businesses there. So what might a streetscape project look like where the angled parking to change to parallel frees up a lot of space? Opportunities for what are now sort of parking lots to become potentially public spaces or outdoor spaces for businesses. And there's actually potential to connect through to Old Wadsworth as well. There's space between buildings to the alley, et cetera. So lots of this study will continue. The gateways that we talked about, what could those look like? So we're doing just sketching some ideas about, are they, intersection treatments? Are they overhead treatments? Are there median treatments? The colored diagram to the right is what might a reconfigured 56th and Vance look like that allowed all traffic to just go right into the parking garage in a much more intuitive fashion. Right now, you probably know the cars have to keep going south and go in through the movie theater. And so exploring these ideas, talking with the engineers about all of this, of course, as well. And that's mostly the end of my spiel. But yeah, would love to hear questions or thoughts. Or
If anybody would like to share some feedback or thoughts or next steps, I'm happy to bring the microphone to you. Really.
Yeah, and I will go through the next steps on the project after there's some questions, but no question. No.
Well, all right. I'll give it to Maureen and then Ms. Smith.
Mine's just a comment, but yesterday when I was at the Charrette and we were looking at different options, there was an option that was put out that I never really considered before, and that you spoke to it a little bit, that on the Grandview side, that we keep the northern side of Grandview blocked off so that you can have the patios and all that activity, and that maybe the south side is a one-way street that would go to the east, so that way you might be able to access the parking garage and do the kiss and ride at the station and all. And I thought, well, that was something that I don't know if we've ever really considered before, but might have some merit.
Yeah, we did start to look at that idea just as in terms of traffic flow to the hub and out of the hub, right? If people come out onto Old Wadsworth, they have to turn right. And then they have to turn left. So it's sort of like this, if you're wanting to go east on Grandview or to the east side of Wadsworth Bypass, it's this very circuitous route to get over there. And people coming from the west and north, getting over to the Vance Street entrance is also sort of challenging. But there's so many possible configurations of these things where curbs, no curbs, bollards, open sometimes, right? Weekdays, maybe closed on the weekends to traffic. So that's just to give you kind of idea of all the different configurations, and exploring this more and talking with the public in late September and council in the bid later, and hopefully landing on kind of some preferred options.
Me too. I need my steps.
No, I was just going to ask, has RTD been looped into any of these discussions at this point yet?
Not yet.
So that's something we need to probably get going with sooner than later. They were, when the hub was constructed, on the access and all that, we've learned a lot, I know, over time. But a lot of what is concerning right now was concerning then, and so getting movement will be something we probably better start soon. I'm happy to help with that.
Sure. Thanks.
I really love that we're talking about the connection of Ralston Creek Trail into Old Town. I think that's going to help with increasing the numbers of bike transportation to Old Town. But there's a little bit of this barrier of Ralston Road, so I'm curious, has this been brought up in discussions and mock-ups?
Yeah, so at this point for this project, not beyond this looking at it as a gateway at the intersection, as we're looking at all of these, the idea of these gateways, what could be accomplished. And the reason for that is the Ralston Road plan that will be kicking off soon, that is going to revisit previous planning that was done around land uses, just because things have changed, obviously, in today's climate. But it will also look at safety, wayfinding, placemaking as well. So that will take a more in-depth look at Ralston from the bypass to, Garrison, maybe.
So the City of Arvada recently received a grant. Actually, it was Aura that was the lead agency in support with the City of Arvada. So Carrie at Aura is going to be leading a grant process with DOLA, and they bid on it. We haven't
may or may
selected
not be
anybody
working
yet,
on
so that's why he's being a little bit coy. But they just submitted the proposal yesterday.
Yes.
So it's still in the review process, but they are familiar with the area, and we'll see what that plan has to offer as in terms of Ralston Road and treatments and pedestrian access.
If we're not working on it, we would interface with whoever is, obviously, for this plan. Because
In a very positive way, I'm sure.
In a very positive way. We'll work nicely together.
Thank you. I think I've asked this before, but I'll ask it again. What thoughts are in play right now thinking about accessibility in terms of now closing off Grandview and Old Wadsworth on those sections, and people feeling like, well, I can't drive up to the restaurant that I used to be able to just get out right there at the handicap parking and walk in. So how are we going to improve that kind of accessibility, continuing this pedestrian idea?
Sure. So we'll probably get into more detail on that once we arrive at some preferred direction from the workshops and public open house as well. But there's all sorts of ways to, again, some of this could be considered that it could be hybrid, that it is open to cars certain times, or there's maybe areas for drop-offs. That may be sort of rethinking the on-street parking zones right at the boundaries of the closures is one way potentially. I'm just throwing this out there that could happen, as a pickup drop-off zone that's as close to the corner as you can get, that at least starts to minimize the distance that people have to go. In terms of the physical accessibility, certainly curbless options or any new design would have to be, have to take into account universal accessibility. But in terms of parking, there's lots of different options, whether it's partially open to cars or creating drop-off zones, et cetera.
Ryan, can you go back to the slide that was showing the enhanced lighting along Old Wads and Grandview? Yeah, so is there any reason that your T isn't going further east down Grandview all the way up to Vance or even past that?
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't catch that.
Yeah.
Well, so the reason why is initially we were thinking that this was overhead string lighting as sort of very specifically mentioned by the community. That cannot be installed along the RTD plaza because you cannot have overhead wires or things that can, I think, come detached and like fly into their wires within 100 feet of the platform edge. So basically that is that whole section of Grandview. But we sort of took a step back and said, special place through design and lighting. It may or may not mean overhead lighting, or maybe it's a combination of elements. So yes, it should extend further, yes. Imagine it extending at least to Vance. It just can't be overhead string lighting there, if that's where we go.
All right, why don't we head to next steps, and
Okay.
we'll go from there.
All right, so this is an outline of the rest of the process. We will be spending the next 3-ish weeks refining some of these alternatives, still keeping them high level, but then we'll be having a public open house at Denver Beer Co. on September 21st. Hopefully I'll see all of you there. There'll be beer. Not free, but you can buy your own beer. And then also as part of this, what we're going to do is on all of our physical boards that we'll have printed of all of this material and then some, we'll have QR codes on the boards. And so the way people will give their input, I mean, they were certainly willing to, obvious we'll have notes and all these things as well, but we'll be encouraging people to scan the code, just like we did with the previous survey, go to Speak Up Arvada, where there will be a new survey specifically asking specific questions to the material presented at the open house. And the reason for this is it will also be available online for people who can't attend in person, and it'll be open from the 21st until October 17th. So that way we're getting all of the feedback in one place, and we don't have to, get online from this site, online from that site. So then on the 18th, the next day, we'll have another technical committee meeting. Luckily we get those nice little graph snapshots. So we'll sort of present what did we hear from the public open house, refine again. We'll have those work sessions with council and the bid board the 24th and 25th of October. And then we will deliver a draft of the plan to the other Mr. S over here right before Thanksgiving. So you can read it over your holiday break. And then moving into winter, city review, back and forth, and then winter, spring of next year, final plan, as well as sort of a conceptual to schematic level design for whatever the preferred alternative for the promenade is.
Any final thoughts, comments, any statements anybody wants to make before we let you go? Okay. Well, thank you for being here, and
Thanks.
more to come.